A runaway finds a judge crying in front of the courthouse, but when he discovers who she really is, he's shocked. Comment and rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The drizzle falling on the steps of the imposing courthouse created small puddles reflecting the yellow lights of the street lamps. It was almost midnight when the man in the black robe emerged from the main doors, carrying on his shoulders the weight of another devastating day. The 30-year-old judge, with features reminiscent of classic movie stars, slumped heavily onto the marble steps, burying his face in his trembling hands. The tears he had been trying to hold back for weeks finally found their way, mingling with the drizzle soaking his dark robes. 8 months. 8 long months since his life had shattered into 1,000 impossible-to-reconstruct fragments, since he had woken up that terrible morning to find only emptiness where his family should have been. His wife had left without a trace, taking with her their 4-year-old daughter, who was all the light of his existence. No note, no explanation, just empty rooms and the echo of childish laughter still ringing through the walls of the empty house. Despair had become his constant companion, following him through the corridors of the courthouse, whispering in his ears during hearings, making every judicial decision an even heavier burden. It was when his sobs became more intense that a tiny presence approached from the shadows on the side of the building. The frail creature that emerged from the darkness looked more like a ghost than a 4-year-old girl. Her appearance was so deteriorated by malnutrition that anyone would mistake her for a 2-year-old. The torn and dirty clothes hung loosely on her skeletal little body, and tangled hair partially covered a face marked by a sadness that seemed too old for someone so young. She approached with hesitant steps, like an injured animal that distrusts human kindness. Her large, empty eyes studied the crying man, and something in her expression touched a deep place in his wounded heart. Without saying a word, the little girl extended a dirty little hand, offering him the only piece of stale bread she had managed to get that day. "Pretty people shouldn't cry," she whispered in a hoarse voice, as if she hadn't spoken in a long time. The judge looked up, surprised by the unexpected apparition. For a moment, he was speechless, observing this little creature who, even in her evident misery, demonstrated a generosity that he had not encountered in the world for a long time. It was the first time in months that he had felt anything other than the pain that consumed him. "What's your name, little one?" he asked, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. The girl shook her head slowly, looking down at her bare feet. "I don't know who I am anymore," she murmured. "Everyone calls me bad things." The words hit the judge like a stab. There was something deeply disturbing in the resignation of that childish voice, in the passive acceptance of a reality that no child should know. He looked around, searching for signs of her caregivers, but found only the empty corridors of the judicial district. "Where are your parents?" he insisted, already imagining the answer he didn't want to hear. "I don't have any," was the simple answer, uttered with a devastating naturalness. In the following days, the girl began to appear in the vicinity of the courthouse with a regularity that both worried and moved the judge. She emerged from the shadows whenever she managed to escape the patrols of the officers who were looking for her, always keeping a safe distance, but watching him with those eyes that seemed to hold terrible secrets. Moved by a compassion that he couldn't fully explain, the judge began to bring her food and clothes, keeping the encounters in absolute secrecy. He knew the legal risks that his action represented, the complications that could arise if his unofficial interference were discovered, but something stronger than prudence impelled him to take care of that abandoned child. It was during one of these secret encounters that the little girl revealed the first clue about her origin. Huddled behind a column of the building, nibbling on a sandwich he had brought, she muttered something that chilled the judge's blood. "The bad woman locks me in the dark when I cry for my mommy," she said, without raising her eyes. "It's very cold down there, and there are bugs that make noise." "What woman?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm despite the anger that was growing in his chest. "The one who's in charge of the place where I lived. She said that girls who cry too much go to the black hole and never come back." The judge felt his hands tremble. He knew the place the child was referring to well, the local municipal shelter, an institution that he himself had determined as the destination for several children in his judgments, blindly trusting the positive evaluations that were contained in the official reports. "Did other children disappear from there?" he asked, already fearing the answer. The girl nodded gravely. "People with nice cars and lots of money came. The children left and never came back. The bad woman was happy when they took someone." The words echoed in the judge's mind like a deafening alarm. He was facing something much more sinister than he had imagined, a network of corruption that operated under his own judicial decisions. The institution in which he had placed his trust was a den of horrors, and he had been involuntarily an accomplice in its operation. That night he couldn't sleep. The girl's revelations haunted him, mingling with his own anguish over the disappearance of his family. For the first time in months, however, he felt that there was a greater purpose guiding his steps, a mission that transcended his personal pain. The next morning, he discreetly began an investigation into the shelter, requesting old documents and cross-referencing information that he should have examined more carefully a long time ago. What he discovered in the first hours of research confirmed his worst fears and revealed the frightening extent of his own negligence. The documents scattered on the desk in the judge's private office told a story that made his stomach churn. 3 days of discreet investigation had revealed a disturbing pattern. Children who entered the municipal shelter with incomplete records remained there for only a few weeks and then simply disappeared from the official files, replaced by vague notes about successful relocation or finalized adoption. The judge ran his fingers through his hair, feeling the weight of the discovery. He had signed dozens of referral orders to that institution, trusting the impeccable reputation that the coordinator had built over the years. The 50-year-old woman, always impeccably dressed and with a permanent professional smile, presented detailed reports on the well-being of the children, photographs of recreational activities, and moving testimonials about families who had found happiness through adoptions facilitated by her work. But the reality that was unfolding was very different. The children photographed in the reports were always the same, recycled in different documents to create an illusion of prosperity and care. The addresses of the adoptive families, when investigated, proved to be non-existent or belonging to people who had never heard of adoption. The money that should have been destined for childcare disappeared into private bank accounts, while the children languished in deplorable conditions. While the judge delved deeper and deeper into that dark investigation, hundreds of miles away, a 30-year-old woman woke up again with a start, bathed in a cold sweat. The simple house on the edge of the busy highway offered little comfort for her recurring nightmares. For 8 months, she had been running away from her own life, carrying on her back a burden of guilt that grew with each passing day. She got out of the narrow bed and walked to the small window that faced the road. The constant noise of the trucks passing in the early morning had become a kind of soundtrack to her chronic insomnia. Her hair, once always well-groomed, now hung lifelessly over her shoulders, and the simple clothes she wore contrasted drastically with the elegance that once characterized her appearance. The memory of that terrible day at the bus terminal haunted her every night. She had stopped for only a few minutes to buy the tickets that would take her away from the life she believed was collapsing. Her husband's cell phone, found forgotten on the breakfast table, had revealed messages that she interpreted as evidence of betrayal. Long conversations with a colleague, scheduled meetings, references to affairs that she did not understand, but which, in her wounded mind, sounded like codes for a secret romance. At that terminal, she left her daughter sitting on the bench for only a few minutes, promising that she would be back quickly. When she returned with the tickets in her hand, she found only emptiness. The little girl had simply disappeared, as if the earth had swallowed her. Hours of desperate searching, shouts that echoed through the corridors of the terminal, appeals to security guards and employees, all in vain. The panic that followed clouded her judgment. Instead of seeking official help, instead of returning home and facing her husband, she fled. The guilt was an unbearable weight, and the shame of having lost her own daughter for a few seconds of carelessness paralyzed her. How to explain to the man she believed was betraying her that she had lost their most precious possession due to pure negligence? Now, months later, she lived on occasional jobs in small businesses in the area, always paid in cash, always temporary. She avoided any situation that could require documents or identification, fearing that her discovery would force her to face the reality she had left behind. With each passing day, the possibility of returning seemed more distant, and the hope of finding her daughter again more fragile. Back in the capital, the judge had arranged a discreet meeting with the runaway girl. He found her hidden behind a trash container in the back of the building, shivering with cold despite the coat he had given her days before. Her big, frightened eyes watched him with a mixture of trust and terror, as if she feared that kindness was just another cruel illusion. "Do you remember anything about how you got to the shelter?" he asked, offering her a warm sandwich he had bought at the nearby bakery. The girl nibbled on the bread slowly, as if savoring every crumb. Her eyes closed for a moment, as if she was trying to reach memories that floated beyond her reach. "There was a woman who cried a lot," she finally murmured. "She left me sitting and said she would be back. But then another woman came, who spoke nicely but had bad eyes. She said the woman who was crying had abandoned me, and that now I was going to a place where there would be other children." The judge's heart tightened. The description was vague, but there was something about it that deeply bothered him. "Do you remember anything else about the woman who was crying?" The little girl shook her head, but then stopped, as if an image had flashed in her mind. "She smelled like flowers, and she had hair like mine, only longer." That night, the judge couldn't concentrate on anything but that description. His wife had always worn the same floral perfume, and her long hair was one of the features he most admired about her. But he pushed the thoughts away, considering it just a cruel coincidence of fate. The investigation into the shelter progressed, revealing a network of corruption that extended far beyond what he had initially imagined. The coordinator did not operate alone. There were public officials involved, influential families who paid considerable amounts for express adoptions, and even other judges who, consciously or not, facilitated the scheme through hasty decisions. The judge discovered that several children had been adopted by families who paid absurd amounts, far exceeding what any legal process would cost. The money circulated through offshore accounts and shell companies, creating a complex financial web that laundered the resources derived from child trafficking. But it was when he found a specific file among the seized documents that his world completely collapsed. The photo was of a clean and well-dressed girl with bright eyes and an innocent smile. The date of entry into the shelter coincided exactly with the day his family had disappeared. The document indicated that the child had been found lost at a bus terminal by a Good Samaritan who had handed her over to the competent authorities. His hands trembled violently as he held that file. The girl in the photo had the same eyes as the little runaway he had been secretly feeding, only full of life and hope. The transformation was devastating. Of that radiant child, there was only a haunted little creature left, marked by months of abuse and deprivation. The truth hit his chest like a lightning bolt. His daughter, his own daughter, was there, reduced to that starving child offering her last piece of bread to a crying stranger. The system he represented, the decisions he had made, all had conspired to destroy his own family in a way he could never have imagined. The judge ran through the deserted streets of the early morning like a man possessed, his robe billowing in the cold wind as he desperately searched for the runaway girl. His heart beat so hard it felt like it was going to explode in his chest, and his hands trembled uncontrollably, holding the file that confirmed his worst fears. Every shadow in the dark alleys could hide his daughter. Every distant sound could be her calling for help. He finally found her huddled behind a dumpster in the back of a small market, sleeping on cardboard soaked by the rain that had fallen during the afternoon. Her lips were blue from the cold, and she was shivering even in her deep sleep. The judge knelt beside her, fighting back the tears that threatened to overflow, and gently touched her skeletal shoulder. "Little one," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Wake up, please." She opened her eyes slowly and for a moment didn't seem to recognize him. The empty, frightened look gradually gave way to a flicker of recognition, but there was still distrust there, as if even this person who showed her kindness could turn out to be another threat. "I need you to tell me everything you can remember about before you came to the shelter," he said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the despair that was consuming him. "Do you remember a tall man who wore dark suits and worked with a lot of important papers?" The girl closed her eyes tightly, frowning as if trying to reach memories that floated in fragmented pieces in her mind. Seconds passed in silence, only the distant noise of nighttime traffic echoing between the buildings. "Sometimes I dream about a man who lifts me up high in the air," she finally murmured, her voice so low that he had to lean in to hear. "He calls me princess and makes me fly like I'm a little bird, but I think they're just made-up dreams." The words pierced the judge's chest like a sharp blade. That was exactly how he played with his daughter every night before bed, lifting her into the air and pretending she was flying while she laughed loudly, filling the house with her contagious joy. The affectionate nickname he used, the games they invented together, everything was there, buried under layers of trauma and suffering. "And do you remember a house? A place where you played and were happy?" he insisted, gently holding her cold little hands between his. This time, tears began to run down the child's dirty face. "There was a big house with colorful toys, and a woman with long hair who smelled like flowers hugged me every night. But the bad woman at the shelter said it was all a lie, that I never had a real family." The judge could no longer hold back his tears. He pulled the girl into his arms, feeling how thin and fragile she was, how her little bones protruded under her skin. His daughter, who once ran through the house like a whirlwind of energy and laughter, now barely had the strength to stand. "I'm that man from your dreams," he whispered in her ear. "And that woman with long hair is your mum. You didn't make anything up, my little princess. I'm your daddy." The girl's reaction was devastating. Instead of joy or recognition, she recoiled from him with wide eyes of terror, as if he were just another lying adult trying to deceive her. The months of abuse and manipulation at the shelter had shattered her ability to trust, even in truths that her heart recognized. "No," she stammered, shrinking against the wall. "The bad woman said my parents abandoned me because I was bad. She said that no one would ever really want me." At that moment, the judge understood the full extent of the evil that had been done to his daughter. It was not enough to separate her from her family, steal her from her home, and subject her to physical deprivation. The coordinator and her accomplices had systematically destroyed her identity, her self-esteem, her ability to believe in love and human kindness. He spent hours there, sitting on the cold ground next to the girl, talking softly about memories they had shared, describing details of the house, her favorite toys, the songs they sang together. Gradually, he saw small flickers of recognition flash in her eyes, like distant stars beginning to shine in a night sky. Meanwhile, the investigation into the shelter gained momentum. The judge had requested a complete surprise inspection of the institution, mobilizing social workers he trusted completely and ordering that all the children be interviewed individually, away from the influence of the coordinator and her staff. The operation revealed horrors that exceeded his worst expectations. Children kept in overcrowded and unsanitary rooms, inadequate food that barely sustained their growing bodies, and a system of punishments that included isolation in dark and damp basements. Several children showed clear signs of severe neglect and psychological abuse. The records found during the search revealed the full extent of the criminal operation. Falsified files, adulterated identity documents, adoption contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars paid by families who wanted to avoid the bureaucracy of legal processes. The coordinator had turned child suffering into a lucrative business, fueled by the greed of adults willing to pay any amount for a child. Among the seized documents, the judge found correspondence that mentioned special products, a nauseating code that referred to particularly attractive or healthier-looking children who commanded higher prices in the illegal adoption market. His daughter had been classified as one of these special products, destined for a wealthy family that had made a substantial offer for her. The most disturbing discovery came when he found recordings of telephone conversations that the coordinator had with her clients. In them, she described the children as commodities, discussing their physical characteristics, ages, and degree of docility as if they were animals being sold at an auction. In one of these recordings, he heard the coordinator's voice describing his own daughter. "We have a 4-year-old girl, blonde, light eyes, very beautiful. She arrived a few weeks ago in excellent condition, but we need to work a little on the issue of obedience. She still remembers her previous family, but we're taking care of that. In a few weeks she'll be ready for delivery." The cold, calculating nature of those words made him feel an anger he had never experienced before. His daughter had been reduced to numbers on a spreadsheet, to a clinical description for buyers who saw her only as an object of desire to be acquired. But perhaps the most devastating discovery was the pile of documents that revealed how the coordinator had orchestrated the abduction of his daughter. The Good Samaritan who had found the girl at the bus terminal was, in fact, a shelter employee, instructed to frequent terminals and other public places in search of lost or momentarily unattended children. The plan was simple and cruel. Identify children temporarily separated from their caregivers, approach them offering help, and then take them directly to the shelter under the pretext of protecting an abandoned child. The parents, panicked by the loss, rarely thought of looking first in official institutions, especially when they believed that their children might have been kidnapped by strangers. That night, after finally managing to take his daughter to a safe and warm place, a temporary shelter supervised by social workers he trusted, the judge sat in his office and made the call he had been putting off for months. He hired the best private investigators he could find, with a single mission: to locate his wife. He needed to find her not only to reunite the family, but because he now understood that she was also a victim of that diabolical scheme. The woman who had dedicated her life to caring for her daughter would never abandon her voluntarily. Something terrible had happened at that terminal, and he suspected that his wife was suffering somewhere, carrying a guilt she didn't deserve. The private investigators worked day and night for 2 weeks before locating the judge's wife. She was living under a false name in a small town 250 miles from the capital, working as a cleaner in a simple roadside motel. The description they received painted a bleak picture: a woman who had completely lost her vitality, dull hair, worn clothes, and eyes that seemed to have given up looking for hope in the world. When the judge arrived at the scene, he found her leaving the motel with a bucket and cleaning cloths in her hands. For a moment, he didn't recognize her. The elegant and radiant woman who had been his companion had been transformed into a shadow of herself. She saw him before he could approach, and her reaction was one of absolute panic. No, she murmured, dropping the cleaning supplies and taking steps back. You can't be here. I can't face this. We need to talk, he said, keeping his distance so as not to scare her even more. It's about our daughter. The mention of the child made her knees buckle, and she leaned against the wall of the building to avoid falling. The tears she had learned to contain in recent months welled up instantly, accompanied by sobs that tore through the afternoon air. I lost her, she stammered through tears. I'm the worst mother in the world. I left our little princess alone for a few minutes, and when I came back she was gone. I searched for hours, screamed her name until I was hoarse, but she simply disappeared as if she had never existed. The judge felt his chest tighten as he saw her suffering. She didn't disappear, he said softly. She was taken, and I found her. The reaction was immediate and devastating. The wife completely collapsed, falling to her knees on the ground as a desperate cry escaped her lungs. Is she alive? She managed to ask between sobs. Is our little girl alive? She is, but she's been through terrible things. She needs both of us now. In the hours that followed, sitting in a small cafe in the town, the judge told the whole story. The discovery of the child trafficking network, the condition in which he found his daughter, the months of suffering she had endured. His wife listened in silence, her face going through every imaginable emotion: relief, horror, anger, guilt. The messages I found on your cell phone, she said finally, her voice broken. I thought you were cheating on me. That's why I decided to leave. And at the terminal, they were conversations about complex legal proceedings, he explained. I was working on difficult cases with colleagues from other courts. There was never anything beyond that. The revelation was like a second stab. Not only had she lost her daughter because of a misunderstanding, but she had suffered alone for months, carrying a double guilt for the loss of the child and for the supposed betrayal that never existed. Will she forgive me? She asked, her voice barely audible. After everything that happened, will she still recognize me as her mother? She remembers you, he said, holding her trembling hands. She remembers your perfume, your hair, the hugs before bed. But it will take time and a lot of love to heal. That same night, they traveled back to the capital. The judge had carefully prepared the reunion, working with psychologists specializing in child trauma to minimize the emotional impact on the girl. She was in a temporary foster care center, receiving intensive medical and psychological care. When they saw their daughter together for the first time, they were both shocked by her appearance. Even after weeks of proper care, she was still well below her ideal weight, and her eyes maintained that expression of constant alertness that characterized traumatized children. She was playing quietly with rag dolls when they entered the room. The initial reaction was distrust. The girl shrank into the corner, watching the two adults cautiously, but when her mother approached slowly and began to hum quietly, the lullaby she always sang before bed, something changed in her eyes. It was the smell that made her react first. The floral perfume her mother used, even in its cheaper version that she could now afford, still carried the essence that had marked so many nights of affection and protection. The girl inhaled deeply, and for the first time in months, a flicker of genuine recognition shone in her face. "Mom," she whispered, her voice laden with a fragile hope that she feared would be broken once again. The reunion was slow and careful. Weeks of family therapy, sessions with specialized psychologists, and a lot of patient love were needed to begin to rebuild the bonds that trauma had fragmented. The girl had frequent nightmares, waking up screaming about the dark basement and the bad woman. It took months for her to smile again, and even longer for her to fully trust that her parents would not abandon her again. Meanwhile, the legal process against the coordinator and her criminal network moved forward rapidly. The woman was sentenced to 20 years in prison, along with several accomplices who operated the scheme. Dozens of children were rescued and returned to their families of origin, and several illegal adoptions were annulled, allowing minors to return to the biological parents who were desperately looking for them. The judge used his devastating experience to implement profound reforms in the region's child protection system. He created strict oversight protocols for all foster care institutions, established tracking systems for lost children, and implemented much more detailed background checks for employees who worked with minors. The fortune that the coordinator had accumulated through her criminal operation, including investments in the stock market and even some applications in cryptocurrencies, was confiscated and transformed into an assistance fund for families who had lost children and for the psychological treatment of traumatized children. A year after the reunion, the family had found a new balance. The girl, now 5 years old, attended a specialized school and had regular therapy, but had returned to playing, laughing, and more importantly, trusting. There were still difficult days, moments when the ghosts of the past haunted her, but she was surrounded by love and protection. On a sunny afternoon, while watching his daughter play in the backyard with new dolls, the judge reflected on the journey they had traveled. The skeletal and frightened child who had offered her last piece of bread to a crying stranger had transformed back into the vibrant girl he remembered, although now she carried invisible scars that would always be part of who she was. His wife, now working as the coordinator of a new support center for families in crisis, had found purpose in transforming her own pain into help for others going through similar situations. They had learned that sometimes the worst tragedies can lead to the deepest transformations, and that true love has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. That afternoon, when the girl ran into his arms shouting "Daddy!" with genuine joy, he knew they had won. The darkness that had tried to destroy his family had only made their light shine brighter, and the little one who had once offered kindness in his darkest hour had taught him that sometimes the greatest miracles come wrapped in the smallest creatures, just waiting for us to have the eyes to see them. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story by rating it from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.